in, guys. Gordon, Brandy, come on in. You okay? Good afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining us. I am honored to be joined today by our treasurer, Liz Moyo, as well as Brandon McCoy and Gordon McGinnis, respectively current and immediate past presidents of New Jersey Policy Perspective. Within the next 9 days, I will meet my constitutional responsibility to enact a balanced budget for New Jersey. This is a responsibility that I take very seriously, and I know it is one which the legislature takes very seriously as well. And to be clear, in whatever form the budget I ultimately sign takes, it will show that despite all the headline fodder, the legislature has agreed to advance the significant majority of our administration's priorities and values. There is no question that when it comes to the middle class investments and the agenda that I have set forth, the legislature has overwhelmingly concurred. However, I do differ from some of my partners in the legislature in the way that we arrived at this budget. The way it's been done, seemingly for time immemorial, has become like a recurring sitcom plotline. Though we all know the episode gets resolved in time and everyone goes home for the summer claiming to have delivered a balanced budget. Cue the applause. We'll be back next season, same time, same channel. It should not surprise anyone in this room that Liz and I and our administration view things differently. New Jersey deserves better than the sitcom that the annual budget process has devolved into. The practice that Liz and I and others across our administration has sought to end over our first two budgets, and the process in which we close a budget on June 30th only to wake up the next day with the same problems kicked down the road. New Jersey needs to turn the channel to real, stable, and sustainable sources of revenue that will buttress our investments, allow us to make long-term commitments to New Jersey's middle-class families, prepare for the days ahead, and restore our credibility with the bond rating agencies. We need to focus not on the end of a single fiscal year, but on investing for the long term and on saving for the rainy day we all know is going to come, whether we want it or not, and whether we're ready for it or not. This is what New Jerseyans sent me and us here to do, and this is the approach we took when crafting the budget that I proposed, now it seems way back, on March 5th. While the budget the legislature sent me may invest in my priorities, and that is a big deal, it already sets up next year's sitcom episode. It doesn't save for tomorrow, and it uses revenues that don't match what either OMB, which is our shop, or OLS, which is the legislature's shop, has calculated, in which I honestly do not yet believe I can certify. All of this done just to avoid the millionaire's tax, something which the overwhelming majority of New Jerseyans of all political stripes, I might add, and many of the Democrats who voted for this budget support. We need the millionaire's tax, by the way, not to begrudge success. It's the American dream, God bless them, but to ask folks to pay a little bit more to help us level the playing field. We need it to secure our long-term ability to invest in our middle class, in our schools, and in their communities, and in direct middle-class property tax relief. Let's be perfectly clear. We're not proposing a tax increase on any one of the almost 9 million New Jerseyans with annual incomes of less than $1 million. And just a couple of cents on the dollar, in fact, on the 19,000 of those 9 million who do make more than $1 million a year and who will keep making out just fine under President Trump's tax laws. We need to be serious about saving for tomorrow and putting our excess revenues into our empty rainy day fund. Right now, our rainy day fund stands at 0, which about matches our ability to weather an economic downturn. Moreover, making a deposit into our rainy day fund will show the bond rating agencies, the same ones, by the way, who downgraded us 11 times under Governor Chris Christie, that we're serious about restoring our credit worthiness. And with all due respect, for me, and I think for us, it is hard to accept an argument about New Jersey's so-called being in a death spiral on the one hand, when our rainy day fund is rated to prop up the hundreds of millions of dollars in Christmas tree spending. Those two notions, a death spiral on the one hand and rating the entire rainy day fund and then backing the truck up on pork, those are completely, utterly, 100% inconsistent. There is much the legislature and I agree upon, having said that. And where we disagree, I will continue to reach out in partnership and in goodwill to bridge those gaps. But we cannot continue to budget as if the only thing that matters is getting us through the next few days. It's time we look to the upcoming decade. I was sent here to build a New Jersey for our children and our children's children. The fight does not end today. It doesn't even end next week. I will fight for good fiscal policy and for the middle class and for tax fairness for the years to come. Brandon and Gordon are here today because they bring considerable common sense to our debates. They are, like we are, Moneyball people. They believe and accept that math matters. So if you won't take my word for it or our word for it, hopefully you'll take one of theirs. But before we get to either Gordon first and then Brandon, and again, it's a thrill to be with them today, please help me welcome an extraordinary leader and public servant, a former member of the legislature, I might add, our treasurer, Liz Moyle. Applause. Cue the applause.
Thank you, everybody. I also would like to give a shout out to our team at Treasury, extraordinary group of people, and they have been incredible assets these past few months. I want to thank them for their efforts. But I want to thank the governor because he's put forth one of the most honest and fiscally responsible budgets this state has seen in perhaps decades. You've steered us far away from the years of underfunding or skipping pension payments altogether to a place where we are now making a record pension payment for the second year in a row. You've begun to course correct after New Jersey Transit was starved and school funding was cut by $1 billion. We're now seeing record investments in those critical areas. You've trusted our team at Treasury and relied on our honest and responsible revenue estimates. One-shots and diversions have also been significantly curtailed. We're looking at another surplus of more than $1 billion. And for the first time in more than a decade, we're poised to make a deposit into our rainy day fund. Cumulatively, you've put forth a forward-thinking, fiscally responsible budget plan focused on what I like to call the 3 S's: savings, surplus, and sustainable revenues. These are the 3 key pillars encouraged by rating agencies and embraced by good government advocates, something everyone should be able to rally behind. Yet, once again, we've arrived at the end of June faced with a similar dilemma. Except this year, it's backed by a drumbeat that grows louder every day, warning of an imminent economic downturn. Just last week, we saw 2 alarming announcements. A Duke University survey indicated that nearly half of the nation's chief financial officers predict that the U.S. economy will be in a recession by the middle of next year. And one of Morgan Stanley's key economic indicators suffered a record, God bless you, a record 1-month collapse, reaching its lowest levels since the heat of the recession in December 2008. As Pew noted this spring, New Jersey is one of only 3 states that currently have nothing in its rainy day fund. And I think we have a visual here to show. And according to, quoted by Pew, the clock is ticking, unquote, on our chances to use the economic expansion to rebuild our reserves. Yet these warnings, clear as day, from economists, from CFOs, from rating agencies, have still been ignored. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but I'd be derelict in my duty as treasurer if I didn't use every opportunity to urge fiscal responsibility. Because if a recession hits and the bottom drops out like it did during the dot-com recession to the tune of $2 billion in hit to our revenue, or worse, like it did during the Great Recession when we lost nearly $5 billion in revenue, that is what a rainy day really looks like. And we won't be able to rely on structural savings or phantom revenue projections to get by if that happens. Demand for safety net services like Medicaid will skyrocket, and we'll need real revenue to survive. Don't forget, states received significant help from the federal government during the last recession, and we have no idea if we'll be able to depend on that again. The bottom line is that we need to rebuild our rainy day fund, and we need recurring revenue sources. So I stand here with the governor today in complete agreement that we need to put an end to short-sighted, politically expedient budget fixes. Trust me, I get it. I've been on the other side of the equation. I've served on the budget committee. I've had to cast difficult votes before. But this should not be a difficult decision. Experts from across the spectrum have made it clear what we need to do. The governor listened and acted, and proposed a budget that answered that call. In the coming week, our goal is to finalize a budget that does the same. Thank you.
That's no problem. Thank you, Liz, for that very compelling case. I was shown a book signed by the staff and senior staff of Governor Dick Hughes by one of his children a few years ago, and in the first couple of pages, all of the staff members presented a book to the governor, and one of the signatories was Gordon McGinnis. You were 12 at the time. So if we needed any proof that Gordon has been there and has seen it all, that to me was enough. It's a real treat that he would be willing to come in. The former boss at NJPP, still affiliated, by the way, and still working with Brandon, but it's a real honor and treat to have Gordon McGinnis with us today. Gordon?
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. You've heard about credit ratings already. 25 years ago, New Jersey was one of just 9 states that had a AAA bond rating. And that meant it saved a lot of money when it issued bonds and the repayment. But more than that, it reflected a quarter century before that, where governors and legislators of both parties realized that New Jersey needed better revenues to make the investments to take advantage of our location and of the opportunities that New Jersey represents. And so they did. It began with Hughes. It went on to Cahill. It went on to Byrne. It went on to Kane. It went on to Florio. And that led to this bond rating that said, yes, New Jersey has increased taxes, but it's been investing those tax receipts wisely. They've built a new system of public higher education. They took over 4 bankrupt railroads and turned it into the best performing commuter rail system in the country. They helped aid to education and to reduce property taxes, particularly for struggling families. So that was a great victory. And then 25 years ago, it all changed. And we've seen 25 years of governors and legislative leaders, because legislative leaders decide what happens in the legislature, legislative leaders of both parties saying, no, let's not do that anymore. Let's not make the investments that are required for New Jersey to recover from a recession. Let's not make the investments that will bring companies and talented people to this state. Let's get by year, so we don't have to explain ourselves when we go out to run for re-election. Let's just take it easy. Let's cut taxes, like we did under Whitman. Let's cut taxes. Everybody will enjoy that, and we won't be worried about taking criticism because people ended up having to pay slightly higher income taxes at one point. So what happened? The investments stopped. the investment in the assets that make New Jersey a terrific place to live, a terrific place to do business, but not if you can't commute on a rail to get to work, not if you can't afford to send your kid to a public four-year college in the state because of the fact that support for higher education has plummeted, not the fact that you have increased higher property taxes, particularly if you live in North Jersey where I live, and I'll verify that, because the opportunities for dealing with all of those issues have been reduced by legislatures, legislative leaders really, and governors of both parties for the last quarter century have been saying, let's just get out of town, let's do the business so nobody will be too angry at us, and let's just keep rolling along without doing what we have to do to make this a better state. And that's what we've been doing. Now, we have an opportunity to change that this year. We have a governor who wants to see a tax that will affect, get this, 19,000 families out of 4 million in the state, who now enjoy incomes of over $1 million, and they would end up having to pay a slightly higher New Jersey income tax, and that would generate over $500 million. That would be a start. There's more that needs to be done, because $500 million in a $38 billion budget isn't that much. But we need to be able to make, again, those investments. And we should look at taxes like getting the sales tax back to 7%. Most of us cannot do the math on the savings when it's 6.625%. Neither can the merchants. So let's raise $700 million by getting that tax back to 7, where everybody can do the math. And let's look at the estate tax that was rescinded under Governor Christie. That too could lead to additional revenues in the hundreds of millions of dollars and would not affect very many families at all. In fact, it would affect about 1,500 to 2,000 a year. We need to get the start, and the start is with the proposal to increase the millionaire's income tax, and that would provide a starting point for New Jersey to begin what should be another quarter-century recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. Well said. Thanks, Gordon. Thank you very much for that. I echo a lot of what you said, including bemoaning the fact that not that long ago in our lifetime, we were a AAA bond-rated state, and I can only imagine the difference that would make today if we were that again. Gordon we had big shoes to fill at New Jersey policy perspective, and they are being filled quite nicely by its current leader, and a guy who again stands for math matters, facts matter, money ball. Please help me welcome up the NJPP current boss, Brandon McCoy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Similar to the remarks that have already been made today, I believe it is very important to state that the investments made in the legislature's proposed budget are critical to growing New Jersey's economy and helping every resident thrive. They are the priorities that New Jersey Policy Perspective has fought for and researched for over 20 years, and we do not take these investments for granted. It is precisely because these investments are so critical that we bemoan the conspicuous lack of sustainable, reliable sources of revenue in this budget. It's already been stated, but New Jersey's approach to budgeting over the past 3 decades has yielded damaging results, and the budget that the legislature has proposed fails to sufficiently depart from that failed approach. It is a strategy of budgeting that presumes all we need to do is figure out how to get to the next fiscal year and dismisses the need for a long-term view that improves how we manage and support our finances. For a state with our fiscal situation, which for those who are keeping score is a record 11 credit downgrades from the 3 major agencies in the past decade that left us with an A3 rating, a refusal to engage in best practices that are proven to strengthen the fiscal health of states is downright short-sighted and irresponsible. And quick reminder, the reason we received those downgrades in the first place is because we repeatedly demonstrated our unwillingness to adequately and responsibly fund our obligations and plan for the future. What makes it even worse is the fact that the country is experiencing a record period of growth that is expected to end relatively soon. and New Jersey has failed to take the steps necessary to prepare for it. It is not as if we don't know what to do. Implementing reliable sources of revenue after a decade of cutting taxes for the wealthy and corporations totaling over $13 billion in lost revenue would help prepare us for the downturn to come, be it a restoration of the millionaire's tax or a restoration of the sales tax or a restoration of the estate tax. Any of those things would have been a smart, common sense thing to do to help rebuild our fiscal health for the years to come, and the clock is running out. And best budgeting practices have been urgently suggested for years on end. Making significant investments in our empty rainy day fund is a basic, good budgeting maneuver that would help prepare New Jersey for tough times and be a signal to ratings agencies that we're beginning to manage our finances in a more responsible manner. This budget from the legislature doesn't do that. Everyone here knows well the damage that New Jersey suffered due to the Great Recession and Superstorm Sandy. Those two events left our finances in such a state that we cut state funding to New Jersey Transit by 90%. We cut state funding to public institutions of higher education by $500 million, which caused them to drastically increase their tuition rates. And we cut the size of government to the point that the Department of Health is operating with nearly half the staff that it used to. And again, it destroyed our ability to afford our obligations. Here's the crux of the matter. The last 10 years for New Jersey was literally a lost decade, and it was due to a failed approach to budgeting and taxes that the legislature continues to follow. A decade out from the Great Recession, we are just now returning to the levels we were at in 2008, be it the median household income levels that we had in 2008, or the poverty rate, or tax revenue collections. Rather than taking active steps to improve our fiscal situation, the legislature's budget is based on a passive approach that simply relies on economic growth that we know is coming to an end very soon. Meanwhile, you can take a look at our neighboring and competitor states: New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Massachusetts, California, even Illinois. They are all collecting tax revenue totals that are 10 to 15% greater than they were in 2008. Here in New Jersey, our revenue collections are less than they were in 2008. We are one of 9 states that remains in the red on this, and it is due, once again, to a failed approach that the legislature continues to rely upon today. So when people say that we have a spending problem, they're flat out wrong. We have a very serious revenue and savings problem. That is why this budget from the legislature gives us great concern. The investments that have been made are incredible and important, and we applaud them. But without any of the active measures that have been mentioned, we have no reason to expect that those investments will remain in place over the long term. And when those cuts are made, you can point to this budget as being one of the reasons why. Those cuts will fall hardest on New Jersey's poorest families, the middle class, and New Jerseyans of color. We know this because we've seen it before, and I fear that we will see it again due to a severe lack of action in this budget proposal. As long as we refuse to restore proper tax rates on the wealthy, we will fail to afford our investments. You cannot fix government if you refuse to fund government. And if we cannot walk and chew gum at the same time, if we cannot both bolster our finances to support investments while improving the processes for delivery and implementation of programs, then we will fail to succeed and continue to find ourselves in this very difficult situation. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Brandon. Well said. We'll take a few questions. Before we do, I want to make 2 observations. One is, it's a typical reality for the likes of Brent and Catherine and Daniel and Brenda and Elise and Mike and Dustin to be in this room, but I am particularly struck that Paul Molshine, Charlie Stiles, and Tom Moran are also with him today. So this is, I'm kind of channeling perhaps a reunion of, I don't know, Pink Floyd or something. So I just want to get that off my chest. Secondly, on a more serious but really important note, the Board of Public Utilities, Kathleen, this morning, correct? Announced by unanimous vote that Ørsted had won the right to build out the first solicitation of 1,100 megawatts of offshore wind power. So I'm not making news with this, it's been out, but I wanted to underscore it. This is a big deal for New Jersey. It is a big deal in particular for South Jersey. This is the first of 3, at least 3 tranches that we've laid out, or the Board of Public Utilities I should say, has laid out 1,100 megawatts this year, another 1,200 next year, another 1,200 in the year 2022. And I am just reading from the BPU's press release that this 1,100 megawatts will be enough power to power roughly 500,000 homes. It will generate just under $1.2 billion of economic benefits, in addition to an estimated 15,000 jobs over the project life, and that includes an overwhelming amount of union jobs. It is a big day for offshore wind, for clean energy, and for the South Jersey economy. So with that, Brent, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I want to make sure, you said you have 9 days and you will fulfill your responsibility. Does that mean you're going to sign the budget, line item veto things out, and we won't be here on July 2nd in the shutdown?
So I do have you in my prayers, but all options remain on the table.
It sounded like that.
And you keep asking me that. I just want to make sure that your question is very consistent. I want to make sure you know that my answer is as well. I got you. I remember people outside having to come in to get water and cool last year. Daniel, do you have something?
You mentioned corrective action. I guess that would be line item veto. And what are you looking at? You mentioned
To be determined. To be determined. We have to look at the whole spectrum of our options, and we will look at the whole spectrum, and we'll use every minute that we have on the clock. Brent. To be determined. To be determined. Again, I want to reiterate something. You have no credibility if somebody argues on the one hand that we're in a fiscal death spiral, and then you back up the truck and add hundreds of millions of dollars of pork spending to what we already had, by the way, in fairness, kept in the budget this year, and then spend the rainy day fund down to its last penny. Those two concepts do not compute. Brenda.
So absent any changes, say you're not negotiating anything in terms of a millionaire's tax or any of the other tax options that you have put on the table, do you have a figure, a sum of how much Christmas tree and pork you would have to expunge?
I don't yet. I mean, this just passed yesterday, so you'll appreciate the fact that we're going through this literally line by line. We've got I was going to say a small army, a pretty large army, in fact, doing that right now, but it's a significant number.
Your pension for sportsmen for a ballpark?
Ballpark, I don't know. So I love that, Brenda, but no, I don't have a ballpark for you. But as I say, there's literally hundreds of millions of what I would call. There's so much pork. George Helmy and I are considering opening up a chain of diners. In fact, there is a lot of pork in there, measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. And I mentioned that we also I have a constitutional responsibility to be able to certify revenues. So I've got to I've got to be able to tie down revenue projections and associate them with a specific rationale, a specific underpinning. The beauty of a millionaire's tax, which number one, the beauty of something we haven't really talked about today, that per pill opioid manufacturer tax that allows us to fund the opioid programs that we have in place. The corporate responsibility fee, if you're a large corporation and you refuse to give health care to your employees and you're making them go on Medicaid, well, we want you to pay that company to pay a per head fee. Those taxes can be buttoned down very precisely. And as was mentioned, and Gordon, I think, and Brandon, and actually all three, Liz as well, this isn't just about stumbling through midnight on June 30th. Those taxes also, those revenue sources, allow us to plan for the intermediate to long term, which is what folks want us to do. So it's not just the investments. And again, we're in a very good place, I have to repeat, on the investments into the middle class, education, transportation, property tax relief, health care. It's not just those investments. It's the ability it's tax equity. Folks want to say, you know what, I'm okay, but I want the deal to be fair. And it hasn't been fair in this state. And then thirdly, it's a multi-year, we want to be able to lay the revenue sources out so that we can give comfort to folks who are trying to figure out how they're going to afford community college or send their kid to pre-K or whatever it might be, that we give them comfort that we've got a long-term plan in place. Paul, I hesitate, but yes. I appreciate that. So am I. Father's Day, brand new. Vans are good. Yeah, believe me, I know you're not emulating me, Paul, but thank you. Thanks for adding that in for clarity.
Anyhow, when it comes to those taxes you named, I mean, you don't have the
To be determined. It's a very good question. And I would add to that, beyond to be determined how this plays out in the next 10 days, tax equity, tax fairness, this notion of presenting a long-term funding plan doesn't die on June 30th. It's not going to go away. And it won't go away until we've cracked the back of this, until we've cracked the back of the bad behavior that Gordon outlined that's been going on for 2 or 3 decades. But it's a very good question, and it's to be determined. Somebody, Mike, and then Charlie.
Governor, just sort of piggybacking on Paul's question, the Senate President yesterday seemed to suggest that in return for some of his tax progress bills, he might be willing to would consider a millionaire's tax. What do you say in response to that? Would you consider a path of progress?
So I've said this privately to the Senate President on a number of occasions, and I've said it publicly, and so this has the added virtue of being consistent in the truth. Of those, I think, 27 bills, there are a number of those, probably double-digit, that we'd be comfortable with. But what we're not going to be comfortable with, and again, this is an inconsistency that I can't get over. If we were sent here to reinvest at last into a ravaged middle class from the last administration, and if, in fact, by doing so, we're going to take it out on members of the middle class. And let's not forget, the folks in our public sector unions live in the middle class. So if we're going to either make them accept lesser health care or go to a pension reality that's a very different one that is impairing to individuals, or to make them pay more for benefits, whatever that combination might be, in exchange for a millionaire's tax, I'm not going to sign up for that. That's not consistent. That is hurting the middle class in order to find a revenue stream to help the middle class. That's not an equation that I'm going to sign on to. Charlie.
Here we are now, the second year in a row, with no support in the legislature for millionaires.
Yep.
Do you feel you've done all you could to convert public support into votes in the legislature after all this attention that you've given the issue?
Another very good question. There are sort of 3 numbers that strike me. One is 120, one is 19,000, and the other is 9 million. And there is an enormous divide between the 9 million residents on the one hand and the 120 folks down the end of the street. Because there's no doubt where the will of the people is on this. And you heard me say this before, but at the risk of repeating myself, 72% of the state want to see a millionaire's tax enacted, including a majority of Republicans. And that strikes me deeply. And they are the folks that elected me. They are the folks who brought me here. They're the folks I'm going to continue fighting for. Have we done everything? I don't know is the answer. But we're going to stay at it. And I repeat, this is not going away. Just no matter how we resolve the current budget riddle, no matter how it looks at midnight on June 30th, tax fairness is a matter of doing what's right and respecting the folks who sent me here. That will not change and will not go away.
Just a quick follow on that. I mean, 10 days ago or so, your staff gave us a very cogent, compelling case for the millionaire's tax, debunking some of the arguments. But my reaction to that was, where's this been? Where's this argument been? I just haven't seen it in any
I think we,
meaningful effect.
yeah, I think we could agree to disagree on that, Charlie. I think we've had that argument out there pretty good. Brandon is the repository of all of the research that's been gathered that income tax rates on wealthy individuals do not lead to their making decisions about where they live. Property tax, particularly for retired folks who don't have kids in school, is a factor, which is why if we get that millionaire's tax, the offer still stands. We'd put $250 million more of property tax relief on top of the billion something that's already in the budget. I think the case has been made, but we're going to continue to make it, I promise you. Tom?
What's your take, Governor, on the vote totals for both the EDA extension, overwhelming, and the budget, both veto-proof majority? Are you in danger of, is the legislature in danger of taking over the agenda and governing through veto override?
Yeah, I don't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about the veto override question, Tom. I think that's, whether it happens or it doesn't happen, that's an inside the bubble, inside pool. Again, I'm working for the 9 million people who sent me here to fix the economy and fix this incredibly ludicrous, broken system every year. I have to say, in addition to that, though, Tom, I'm jaw-dropped, awestruck, jaw-dropped, something by the folks who voted to extend the economic development incentives. I just literally, that takes my breath away. I give a lot of credit to the folks who stood up and either voted against it or spoke against it in both the budget or the EDA extension. And again, the budget's tricky because the budget, again, has got a lot of, overwhelmingly, the stuff in there that we want on the investment side. But the EDA extension, this is a law. It's quite clear that was written by special interests for special interests. And it passes overwhelmingly inside that bubble down the street. It takes my breath away. Somebody said to me, only in Trenton can you have the following conversation. Yeah, but hey, you could sign the bill. You control the board. You could reject the minutes. And I thought, only in Trenton, only in New Jersey would somebody to say, no, sign an awful bill written by special interests for special interests, but then don't adhere to the bill and just and behave differently. My head was exploding. But real quick, yeah.
Given these two votes,
Yep.
if you look at your relations with the legislature, look at how you've handled that so far as governor, what kind of assessment would you do of your own side?
I will tell you, more importantly, if I may, to change the question slightly, I would ask the legislature how their relationship is with the people they represent. Please, Daniel.
Any thoughts on the fundraiser that Philip Northwest held for SUNY a few days ago?
I have no thoughts on that. Bless them. Yes.
So just to clarify again on Brett's question, so I know you said initially that you will sign the budget in the next 9 days, but if you're keeping a fund shutdown on the table.
Yeah. I don't think I ever said that I would sign it necessarily in the next 9 days, but I'm just saying all options. You should assume everything is on the table and we'll use the whole clock.
So it's possible that it could be in 12 days.
Catherine, don't be mad at me. All options are on the table and we'll use the entire clock. Last question, Dustin.
Going back to the tax incentives, aren't you, by allowing the board to, by not vetoing minutes, not taking action, awards are being approved, aren't you implicitly condoning the special interest written legislation that benefits special interests?
You mean in the here and now?
Yeah.
No, the good news is, and folks need to know this, that we put new sheriffs in there and that we're managing this process.
Why not extend it with the new sheriffs?
Because I think that's an awful public policy precedent. Awful. I mean, this is clearly, I'm prepared to play the string out for the next 9 days because I have complete confidence in Tim Sullivan, Kevin Quinn, the chair, new compliance officer. I know we're doing this right. But the notion, the public policy reaction, particularly if you're in the middle class, if you're a taxpayer anywhere in the state, and you look at the audit that was done by the comptroller and the early returns on the task force, and you see this behavior, and you can't find 20% of the jobs, and you'd think with all of that, you would re-up that. Well, I can't do that. Then the folks won't stand for that. I want to thank everybody. I'm very happy it's gotten into a very good place, and it's a great example. Gateway, I want to give Loretta Weinberg in particular a shout out. Gateway and medical marijuana are two examples that prove when we work together we can get really good results. Thank you. I want to thank Gordon, Brandon, and Liz, and thank you all for coming out. Have a great weekend. We'll keep in touch with you. Thank you all. Thanks, man. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Happy to do it. Happy to do it.